My son watched my car careen off a cliff and plunge into a dark ravine. He didn't scream. He didn't scramble down the embankment to pull me from the twisted, smoking wreckage. No, he stood there on the edge of the rain-slicked road, hands shoved casually into his pockets, waiting. He waited to make sure I wasn't moving. He waited to ensure the silence was absolute. And then, he simply turned his back and walked away, leaving me to bleed out in the freezing mud. What my son didn't know was that while he was already mentally spending my $6,000, $8 million trust fund, I was clinging to life. I survived. And I spent the next 20 days planning a revenge so legally airtight and financially devastating that he would never see it coming. Thank you for being here with me today. Before we dive into the darkest chapter of my life, I have a quick question for you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I always read them now. A quick disclaimer. This is a fictional story crafted to shed light on real-world family betrayals, financial manipulation, and the importance of protecting your assets. Any resemblance to actual persons or events is purely coincidental, but the lessons about trust and legal boundaries are deeply authentic. I am Patrick Sullivan. I'm 61 years old, a retired structural engineer who spent 40 years building a modest empire in Portland, Oregon. My wife, Catherine, and I worked tirelessly, skipped vacations, and poured every extra dime into our investments. We did it all for one reason: to provide a rock-solid future for our only child, Jordan. I thought I had raised a good man. I thought I had raised a son who would carry on our legacy with integrity. I was wrong. It started on a Tuesday night in mid-November. The Portland sky had unleashed a torrential downpour, the kind of freezing rain that turns the asphalt into a treacherous, reflective sheet of black ice. I was driving my silver sedan along Cornell Road, navigating the sharp, winding curves of the West Hills. It was a route I had driven thousands of times. I knew every bend, every dip, every precarious drop-off. But tonight was different. Tonight, my car had been tampered with. As I approached Dead Man's Curve, a notoriously sharp bend flanked by a flimsy guardrail and a steep drop, I eased my foot onto the brake pedal. It went straight to the floorboard. There was no resistance, no friction, just a sickening, empty thud against the carpet. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. I pumped the pedal furiously. Nothing. The car was accelerating, hydroplaning across the slick surface, completely out of my control. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles bone white, desperately trying to wrestle the 2-ton machine into a turn. It was useless. The sedan tore through the guardrail like it was made of paper. The awful sound of rending metal filled the cabin, followed by a terrifying sensation of weightlessness. The world flipped violently. Sky, ground, trees, rain, everything spun in a chaotic blur. The airbags deployed with a deafening crack, punching me in the face and chest. Then came the impact, a concussive, bone-shattering crunch that forced the breath from my lungs. My ribs cracked, my head snapped violently against the side window, and then everything faded into a suffocating darkness. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I finally dragged myself back to awareness, the pain was absolute. It radiated from my chest with every shallow breath. Warm blood trickled down my forehead, stinging my eyes. I was pinned in the driver's seat, the steering column crushed against my legs. Rain poured through the shattered windshield, soaking me to the bone. Through the haze of agony and rain, I saw something. Above me on the road, a pair of headlights cut through the gloom. Someone had stopped. A silhouette appeared at the edge of the ravine. A tall, broad-shouldered figure standing perfectly still against the glare of the high beams. Jordan, relief, pure and overwhelming, flooded my system. It was my son. He had found me. He was going to help. I tried to shout his name, but all that came out was a wet, raspy cough. I waited for him to scramble down the muddy slope. I waited for him to yell out, to call for an ambulance, to do something. But Jordan didn't move. He just stood there, a dark specter against the bright lights, looking down at the mangled wreckage of my car. I blinked, trying to clear the blood from my vision. Why wasn't he moving? Why was he just watching? Finally, he pulled a phone from his pocket. The wind carried his voice down the ravine, chilling me far more than the rain. Yeah, 911? There's been a crash on Cornell Road. Single car went over the edge. Driver looks completely unresponsive. You should probably send a coroner. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. He sounded like he was reporting a pothole to the city council, not the near-fatal accident of his own father. He didn't ask them to hurry. He didn't sound panicked. He hung up the phone. He stood there for another 10 seconds, making absolutely sure I hadn't moved. And then he turned his back, climbed into his car, and drove away. The taillights faded into the night, leaving me alone in the dark, trapped in a crushed metal box. Listening to the rain, he left me. My own son had left me to die. The wail of the sirens eventually pulled me from the brink. The paramedics arrived, descending the slope with flashlights and the jaws of life. I remember the screaming grind of metal as they pried the door open. I remember being strapped to a rigid backboard, the agonizing jolts as they hauled me up to the ambulance. But most of all, I remember the crushing realization that my son had walked away. I woke up 2 days later in a sterile, brightly lit room at Legacy Emmanuel Hospital. The rhythmic beep, beep, beep of a heart monitor was the only sound. My chest was wrapped tightly, my ribs aching fiercely with every breath. I had a mild traumatic brain injury, 3 broken ribs, and a fractured collarbone. A nurse, a sharp-eyed woman named Rachel, walked in to check my IV. I forced my dry, cracked lips to move. "My son," I croaked. "Did he come back?" Rachel stopped. Her face softened with a pity I couldn't bear. She looked at her chart, then back at me. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sullivan. You were brought in by the paramedics. There's been no sign of your son. We've tried calling the emergency contact number you provided, but it goes straight to voicemail." He hadn't come back. He hadn't checked on me. But as I was soon to discover, Jordan had been very, very busy while I was fighting for my life in the ICU. He hadn't been waiting by the phone for news of my condition. He had been waiting for the exact moment he could raid my accounts. Later that evening, after the doctor had cleared me of any major intracranial hemorrhaging, Rachel brought me my personal effects. They had salvaged my phone from the wreckage. It was cracked, the screen spider-webbed, but it still functioned. I plugged it into the wall charger beside my bed and waited for it to power on. When the screen finally lit up, a flurry of notifications flooded the lock screen. Missed calls from my lawyer, Richard Wade, emails from my business partners. But one notification stood out, bold and glaring against the shattered glass of my screen. It was an automated security alert from the First National Bank of Oregon. Urgent. Transaction flagged for secondary authorization. My fingers trembled as I tapped the notification and logged into my banking app. The screen loaded, and my blood ran cold. There, sitting in the pending queue, was an attempted wire transfer. Amount, $6,800, source, Sullivan Family Trust Fund destination account, offshore account ending in 7742, Cayman Islands, initiated by Jordan M. Sullivan. Time, November 15, 2:14 a.m. I stared at the timestamp. 2:14 a.m. That was less than 2 hours after my car had gone over the cliff. While I was lying unconscious, bleeding out in the wreckage, my son had not been calling hospitals or praying for my recovery. He had been sitting in his car, frantically trying to drain my life's work into an offshore account. The system had only blocked it because moving an amount that large required dual biometric authorization. A safeguard I had implemented 3 years ago after Catherine passed away. He thought I was dead, I realized with a sickening lurch in my stomach. Or he thought I was close enough to death that it wouldn't matter. Suddenly, the events of the past few weeks slammed into me with the force of a freight train. The red flags I had willfully ignored began to connect, forming a terrifying picture of manipulation and greed. 3 weeks prior to the crash, Jordan had stopped by my house in Eastmoreland unannounced. He had been agitated, pacing my kitchen, complaining about his finances. Since he had started dating Simone, a polished, high-maintenance woman with a taste for designer labels and expensive tastes, his lifestyle had inflated drastically. "Dad, I need a loan, just 50 grand to tide me over until this new venture takes off," he had begged, leaning against my granite countertops. I had refused. I had given him plenty of loans in the past year, none of which had been repaid. "Jordan, you need to learn to live within your means. Your trust fund doesn't kick in until I'm gone or until you turn 40. I'm not enabling this reckless spending anymore." He had been furious. He had stormed out, cursing under his breath. But the next day, his demeanor had completely changed. He had returned, apologizing profusely, acting like the dutiful son. He had even offered to take my sedan into the shop. "I noticed your brakes were squeaking when you pulled into the driveway yesterday, Dad," he had said, his voice dripping with faux concern. "Let me take it to my guy across town. He'll get it fixed up for you. On me, consider it an apology." I had handed him the keys without a second thought. He had returned the car a day later, assuring me the brakes were brand new. Lying in that hospital bed, the terrifying truth crystallized in my mind. He hadn't taken the car to a mechanic to get the brakes fixed. He had taken it somewhere to have the brake line deliberately sabotaged. He had planned this. My own son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, had meticulously orchestrated my murder to accelerate his inheritance. My heart hammered against my bruised ribs. The sheer magnitude of his betrayal threatened to consume me, but I forced the emotion down. I couldn't afford to break down. I couldn't afford to be weak. If Jordan thought he had won, he would try again, and next time he wouldn't leave it to chance. I needed to act, and I needed to act immediately. I picked up my phone and dialed the one person I trusted implicitly. My longtime corporate lawyer, Richard Wade. "Patrick?" Richard answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Where the hell have you been?" "I've been calling Richard. Listen to me very carefully," I interrupted, keeping my voice low. "I am at Legacy Emmanuel Hospital. I need you to come here right now, and I need you to bring discharge papers. Do not tell anyone where I am, not even your wife, Patrick. What is going on? Were you in an accident?" "It wasn't an accident, Richard. Jordan cut my brake line. He tried to kill me, and he just tried to wire out the entire trust fund." Silence hung heavy on the line. Then Richard's tone shifted from a concerned friend to a ruthless attorney. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Pack your things." I ended the call and swung my legs over the edge of the bed. Pain shot through my chest, but I gritted my teeth and began pulling off the hospital gown. I couldn't go back to my house in Eastmoreland. Jordan had keys. He had the security codes. He would undoubtedly go there looking for important documents or to finish the job if he discovered I was still alive. By the time Richard arrived, carrying a briefcase and a stern expression, I was dressed and waiting. We bypassed the main nurse's station and slipped out through a side exit into the freezing pre-dawn air. "Where to?" Richard asked as he unlocked his Mercedes. "Barbara's," I replied, sliding carefully into the passenger seat. Barbara Wells was my late wife's best friend. She lived in a quiet, unassuming neighborhood in Woodstock, and more importantly, Jordan despised her because she had always seen right through his entitled behavior. He would never look for me there. We drove in silence, the rain drumming against the roof of the car. My mind was racing, cataloging assets, locking down accounts, preparing for war. Barbara opened her door at 4:30 a.m. in a plush robe, taking one look at my bruised face and Richard's grim expression. She didn't ask questions. She simply stepped aside and ushered us into the warmth of her living room. "I'll put the kettle on," she said softly. As I sat on Barbara's floral sofa, Richard opened his laptop. "All right, Patrick," he said, his fingers poised over the keyboard. "He's crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. What is the play?" "First, we lock him out of everything," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I want the trust fund frozen. I want my personal accounts flagged for fraud. Change the biometric lock codes on the office safe. And then we start hunting. Hunting for what? Evidence. We're going to build a case so airtight that he won't just be disinherited, Richard. He's going to spend the rest of his life in a federal penitentiary." While I was strategizing from the safety of Barbara's kitchen, Jordan was beginning to realize his carefully constructed plan was unraveling. The morning after I vanished from the hospital, he strutted through the sliding glass doors of Legacy Emmanuel. He was dressed in a tailored charcoal cashmere coat, looking less like a grieving son and more like a CEO ready to claim a hostile takeover. He approached the main nurse's station, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. Rachel, the same sharp-eyed nurse who had attended to me, was on duty. "I'm here to see Patrick Sullivan," Jordan announced, his voice smooth and authoritative. "Room 302. I'm his son." Rachel didn't smile. She pulled up my file on her monitor. her eyes flicking over the screen before returning to Jordan. Her expression was utterly blank. Mr. Sullivan was discharged. Jordan's confident demeanor faltered. He blinked, clearly thrown off balance. Discharged? That's impossible. He was in critical condition. He had a brain injury. He couldn't just walk out of here. He signed himself out against medical advice early this morning, Rachel stated flatly. I don't have any further information. Where did he go? Jordan demanded, his voice rising in panic. I cannot disclose that, sir. Jordan slammed his fist against the counter, dropping the polished facade entirely. He swore loudly, turning heads in the waiting area, before storming out of the hospital, his expensive coat billowing behind him. He didn't know where I was, but he knew where I kept my most valuable documents. Back at Barbara's, I accessed my home security cameras. I watched the live feed as Jordan frantically tore through my home office. He was looking for the security tokens in my wall, safe to bypass the biometric locks on the trust fund. But I had changed the code. After multiple failed attempts, he kicked the steel door in rage. Then, he made a phone call. The camera's microphone picked it up perfectly. I don't have the tokens yet. Jordan barked into the phone, his face pale. I know how much I owe you. He's missing. Just give me 2 more weeks. I have a plan. Just call them off. He hung up, breathing heavily in the wrecked office. I sat back in my chair, the chill in my bones intensifying. I know how much I owe you. Jordan wasn't just greedy. He was in deep, dangerous debt. He had borrowed money from people who didn't send polite collection letters. He had borrowed money from people who broke legs, or worse. And instead of coming to me for help, instead of admitting his failures, he had conspired to have me murdered to pay off his debts with my life savings. I quickly downloaded the security footage to a secure encrypted cloud drive Richard had set up. I now had undeniable proof of his attempted burglary and his motive. But as Richard had pointed out earlier, intent wasn't enough to secure an attempted murder conviction. We needed physical evidence. We needed the smoking gun, or in this case, the severed brake line. I picked up my phone and called Richard. I got him on camera trying to crack the safe. He admitted on the phone that he owes someone a massive amount of money. That's excellent, Richard replied, the sharp click of his keyboard audible in the background. But I have bad news, Patrick. I just tracked down your car. Where is it? It was towed to the Rivergate salvage yard in North Portland. But Jordan beat us to the punch. He paid the yard manager $500 cash to bump it to the front of the line. What does that mean, Richard? It means they are scheduled to crush the car at midnight tonight. The physical evidence of the tampered brake line is going to be compacted into a cube of scrap metal in exactly 12 hours. My stomach plummeted. If that car was crushed, Jordan's defense attorney could easily argue that the crash was a terrible accident caused by mechanical failure or poor weather conditions. Without the cleanly sliced brake line, it was just the paranoid word of an injured old man against a grieving son. We need that brake line, I said, my voice hardening. We have to go to the police, Richard urged. They can get a warrant to halt the destruction. No, I countered immediately. If we involve the police right now, Jordan will know we're on to him. He's cornered and desperate. If he finds out I'm building a case, he might flee, or worse, he might send whoever he owes money to after me. We have to secure the evidence ourselves. Patrick, you have 3 broken ribs and a concussion. We are not breaking into a salvage yard. Be at Barbara's house by 10 o'clock tonight, I ordered, ignoring his protest. Bring heavy-duty bolt cutters, flashlights, and a hacksaw. We are going hunting. At 10:30 p.m., Richard's Mercedes glided to a halt half a mile away from the Rivergate salvage yard in North Portland. The industrial district was a desolate wasteland of shipping containers, looming cranes, and chain-link fences topped with razor wire. The relentless Portland rain had returned, turning the unpaved shoulder of the road into thick, sucking mud. Richard killed the headlights. He sat behind the wheel, staring at the dark, imposing silhouette of the salvage yard. He looked entirely out of place in his tailored suit, holding a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters across his lap. I am a corporate lawyer, Patrick, Richard said quietly, his grip tightening on the handles of the cutters. If we are caught breaking and entering, I will be disbarred. You will be arrested. and Jordan will walk away with everything. Then we make sure we aren't caught," I replied, grabbing a high-powered flashlight from the back seat. Every movement sent a spike of agonizing pain through my broken ribs, but adrenaline was a potent painkiller. I opened the door and stepped out into the freezing downpour. We hugged the shadows, staying close to a rusted corrugated metal wall until we reached the perimeter fence of the yard. The area was lit by harsh sodium floodlights, casting long, eerie shadows across the mountains of crushed vehicles. We found a blind spot, behind a stack of shipping pallets, out of the direct line of sight of the security booth at the main gate. Richard didn't hesitate. He maneuvered the bolt cutters into position and snapped through the heavy chain-link fencing, creating a jagged opening just large enough for a man to squeeze through. "I'll go first," I whispered, getting down on my hands and knees. The mud soaked through my slacks instantly. I dragged myself through the gap, the sharp edges of the fence snagging my jacket, my chest screaming in protest with every inch. Richard followed silently behind me. Once inside, the sheer scale of the yard was overwhelming. Thousands of cars were stacked precariously, a labyrinth of twisted metal and shattered glass. We moved quickly, keeping low, the rain masking the sound of our footsteps. "There," Richard pointed, aiming his flashlight toward a clearing near the back of the yard. Looming in the darkness was the massive hydraulic car crusher, a hulking machine that looked like an instrument of torture. And sitting right next to it, scheduled to be flattened into a pancake in less than an hour, was my silver sedan. The car was unrecognizable. The front end was completely crumpled, the hood folded in half like an accordion. The windshield was entirely gone, but the chassis, the underside of the car, was still intact. "Keep an eye on the guard shack," I told Richard, dropping to the muddy ground beside the driver's side door. Laying flat on my back was absolute torture. It felt as though a hot iron was being pressed into my fractured collarbone. But I pushed through the pain, dragging my body beneath the ruined undercarriage. The smell of leaking motor oil and antifreeze was overpowering. I clicked on my flashlight and swept the beam across the tangle of metal, suspension components, and exhaust pipes. I followed the path of the brake lines, tracing them from the master cylinder toward the rear wheels. And then I saw it. About 2 feet down the line, just before the chassis curvature, the reinforced rubber hose had been severed. I pulled myself closer, shining the light directly on the brake. This was no rupture from the violent impact of the crash. It wasn't a stress fracture or a blowout. The cut was exceptionally clean, a surgical slice made with a heavy-duty box cutter or a specialized blade. My breath caught in my throat, seeing it with my own eyes. The physical manifestation of my son's murderous intent was profoundly different from suspecting it. It was cold, it was calculating, it was indisputable proof that someone had tried to kill me. "Richard, get under here," I hissed, my voice trembling with a mixture of fury and vindication. Richard scrambled under the car, holding his smartphone. "Good God," he whispered, as the beam of his phone's flashlight illuminated the severed line. "Take pictures, hundreds of them, close up, wide angle. Make sure you get the VIN plate in the background for chain of custody," I ordered. The flash of his camera illuminated the undercarriage like strobe lights at a macabre disco. He captured every angle, documenting the clean edge of the cut. "Done, now what?" Richard asked, his voice tight with anxiety. I pulled the hacksaw from my jacket. "Now, we take a souvenir." Positioning the saw was incredibly difficult in the cramped space, and the exertion sent waves of nausea through me. But I began to saw through the metal housing, 6 inches above and below the deliberate cut. The screech of metal on metal seemed deafeningly loud in the quiet yard. Snap, the section of the brake line broke free. I slipped it into a plastic evidence bag Richard held open. Suddenly, the sweeping beam of a security flashlight cut through the darkness, hitting the stack of cars directly above us. "Hey! Who's out there?" a gruff voice yelled over the sound of the rain. The crunch of heavy boots on gravel approached rapidly. "Go! Go!" Richard scrambled out from under the car. I forced myself to roll out, ignoring the blinding pain in my chest. We scrambled to our feet and sprinted back toward the gap in the fence. The security guard shouted again, the beam of his flashlight wildly tracking our movement. "Stop right there," I'm calling the police. I pushed myself harder, the mud slipping beneath my shoes. We reached the gap. I dove through head first, Richard right on my heels. We didn't look back. We ran blindly through the industrial park until we reached the Mercedes. Richard threw the car into drive and we peeled away from the curb, leaving the security guard shouting in the distance. We drove for 10 minutes in complete, heavy silence, the only sound the rhythmic thudding of the windshield wipers. We were soaked, covered in mud, and I was bleeding through my shirt from a reopened cut on my chest. But I was smiling, a cold, hard smirk. I looked down at the plastic bag in my hands, the severed brake line. We have him, Richard. We finally have him. We didn't go back to Barbara's house. We drove straight to the North Precinct of the Portland Police Bureau. It was 3 a.m, but the desk sergeant took one look at Richard's Bar Association card, my bruised face and the sealed plastic bag, and immediately woke up a detective. Detective Aaron Brooks was a veteran homicide investigator, a man with sharp, tired eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He listened in silence as Richard and I laid out the timeline, presented the financial records showing the $6.8 million transfer attempt, played the security footage of Jordan trying to break into the safe, and finally handed over the severed brake line. Brooks studied the piece of rubber and metal for a long time. He turned it over in his hands, examining the clean cut. "This is attempted murder, Mr. Sullivan," Brooks said finally, his voice gravely, "and your primary suspect is your own flesh and blood." "He is no longer my son," I replied, my voice steady, devoid of any warmth. "He is a threat to my life. I want him arrested, I want him charged, and I want the trust fund secured." Brooks nodded slowly, recognizing the absolute resolve in my eyes. "I will have this brake line sent to the forensics lab immediately. They will confirm what kind of tool was used. In the meantime, I am opening a formal investigation. We will subpoena his phone records, his bank accounts, and pull his location data. But Mr. Sullivan, you need to understand something." "What is it?" "If your son realizes he failed to destroy the evidence, he is going to panic. Desperate men who owe dangerous people money do not think rationally. They lash out. I need you to stay hidden. Do not confront him. Do not answer his calls. Let us build the net, and when it's completely secure, we will pull it tight." "I'm not hiding forever, detective," I warned. "Not forever," Brooks assured me, a dangerous glint in his eye. "Just until I have enough to bury him." For the next 5 days, I remained a ghost. I didn't leave Barbara's house. I didn't log into my social media accounts. To the outside world, Patrick Sullivan had simply vanished following a devastating car crash. While I recuperated in hiding, Detective Brooks was aggressively building the case against my son. He operated with a quiet, lethal efficiency. On day 3 of my self-imposed exile, Brooks called Richard and me with the first major breakthrough. "Forensics came back on the brake line," Brooks announced over the speakerphone, his voice crackling slightly. "It was cut with a specialized, heavy-duty utility blade. Not a standard knife, something a mechanic or a contractor would use. It was a precise, deliberate sabotage. Your crash was officially an attempted homicide." Hearing those words spoken aloud by a law enforcement officer solidified the horrific reality of the situation. It was no longer a terrifying suspicion, it was a proven fact. "What about his finances?" Richard asked, leaning over the kitchen table. "That's where things get much darker," Brooks continued. "We pulled his bank records and ran a deep background check on his associates. Jordan is drowning in debt, over $4 million. My jaw dropped. $1. $4 million, how is that even possible? He barely makes $100,000 a year at the firm. Gambling, Brooks said bluntly. He's been playing in high-stakes, unlicensed poker clubs operating in the back rooms of Southeast Portland. But he didn't stumble into this scene by accident. He was led by who? His fiancée, Simone Parker, or whatever her real name is, Brooks explained. She's the one who introduced him to these games. Our undercover vice unit recognized her description. She's a known associate of several loan sharks. She's been manipulating him for months, stroking his ego, encouraging him to play higher stakes, and watching him lose everything. 3 weeks before your accident, Jordan missed a $50,000 balloon payment to a particularly ruthless lender. 3 weeks, the exact time he had borrowed my car to fix the brakes. The picture was now complete. Simone had identified Jordan as an easy mark, an entitled, weak-willed heir to a substantial fortune. She had systematically isolated him, plunged him into insurmountable debt, and then presented a gruesome solution. Kill your father, inherit the trust, pay off the sharks, and we run away rich. He was a pawn, but a willing and murderous one. We have the motive, we have the forensic evidence. We have the financial records, Richard summarized, tapping his pen against his notepad. When do we arrest him? Not yet, Brooks warned. If we arrest him now, his defense will argue that the debt proves he was desperate. But there's no hard proof he was the one who cut the brake line or ordered it. We need him to make a critical error. We need him to confess, or we need him to attempt another major fraud. He thinks he's getting away with it. We let him get a little more desperate, and he will hang himself. The next morning, Jordan found my hiding spot at Barbara's house after tracing a takeout credit card charge. He pounded on the door, putting on a grotesque mask of fake concern. "Dad, I've been worried sick." I blocked the doorway, feeling nothing but cold contempt. "Cut the act. I know about the $6.8 million transfer. I know you severed my brakes. I know about Simone and the loan sharks." Jordan turned pale, but instead of apologizing, a cold malice replaced his fear. He smirked. "You can't prove anything. The car is gone. I'll just petition for emergency guardianship. Claim your brain injury made you delusional and stick you in a nursing home with a biometric lock. You are going to give me that money, one way or another." He walked back to his SUV laughing. He wasn't retreating. He was escalating, and I realized just how far he was willing to go later that afternoon. My phone buzzed incessantly. Richard was calling. "Patrick, you need to open Facebook right now." Richard barked, his voice laced with panic. "Jordan is live streaming. He's destroying you." I opened the app, my stomach dropping. There was Jordan, sitting in a dimly lit room, staring into the camera with tears streaming down his face. He was putting on the performance of a lifetime. Over 2,000 people were watching live, business associates, family friends, members of my country club. "I didn't want to make this public," Jordan was saying, his voice choking with fake emotion. "But I need help. My father, Patrick Sullivan, was in a terrible car accident last week. He survived, thank God, but the head trauma, it's changed him." He paused, wiping a tear from his eye. "He's become paranoid, delusional. He's convinced that I, his only son, am trying to hurt him. He's hiding from me, refusing medical treatment. I'm terrified he's going to hurt himself. I'm starting the legal process to obtain emergency medical guardianship to save his life. But he's fighting me. Please, if anyone sees him, tell him his son loves him." The comments were flooding in, outpourings of sympathy. People I had known for 20 years were offering him prayers and legal advice on how to have me committed. My phone buzzed again. It was Douglas Waverly, a key investor in a commercial real estate project I was developing. "Patrick," Douglas said, his voice hesitant, "I saw Jordan's video. Look, until this medical situation is resolved, my board has decided to pause our funding. We can't risk the liability of an incapacitated managing partner." He hung up before I could explain. In less than 20 minutes, my own son had assassinated my character, frozen my business deals, and set the stage to legally steal my autonomy. He was playing a ruthless game of public manipulation, gaslighting an entire city into believing I was insane. He wants a public spectacle? I thought, a cold fury settling deep in my bones. I'll give him one. I immediately called Detective Brooks. "Jordan is trying to destroy my reputation publicly to lay the groundwork for a guardianship hearing," I explained, my voice vibrating with suppressed anger. "He thinks he's untouchable. I saw the video," Brooks replied, his tone grim. "It's a textbook manipulation tactic. He's isolating you by ruining your credibility. But it also means he's getting desperate. The loan sharks are likely tightening the screws. We need to draw him out. We need a setting where he feels completely in control, where he attempts to finalize a fraud in front of witnesses." "I know exactly where," I said, a plan rapidly forming in my mind. "The Portland Business Association is hosting their annual charity gala this Saturday at the Hotel Lucia. It's the biggest networking event of the year. Jordan has been posting online that he's attending to seek emergency investors to cover my fabricated medical costs. He's going to use the gala to con my business associates out of millions. If he attempts to solicit funds under false pretenses while we have proof of his underlying debts and the attempted murder, that's wire fraud and extortion, Brooks stated, the gears turning in his head. It's the nail in his coffin, but we need to catch him in the act. He wants a spectacle, I said, my voice hardening. We will give him one he will never forget. To execute this, I needed an ally whose reputation was absolutely bulletproof. I called Henry Blackwell. Henry was a 70-year-old titan of Portland real estate, a man whose integrity was legendary, and a close friend of my late wife, Catherine. He had watched Jordan grow up. I explained everything to Henry, the break line, the $6, $8 million transfer, the offshore accounts, simony, the crushing won, $4 million our debt. The silence on the phone stretched for a long, heavy moment before Henry finally spoke. That ungrateful little backstabber, Henry growled, his voice thick with disgust. Patrick, tell me what you need me to do. I need you to stand by my side at the gala, I said. When Jordan tries to claim I am mentally incompetent, I need the most respected man in Portland to tell the room he is a liar. I will be there, Henry promised. I'll make damn sure everyone in that ballroom knows exactly what he is. Saturday evening, I arrived an hour late to the Hotel Lucia Gala, accompanied by Richard and Henry Blackwell. Detective Brooks and his plainclothes officers were already discreetly positioned around the perimeter of the grand ballroom. We slipped onto the mezzanine balcony, overlooking the crowd. I quickly spotted Jordan, wearing a brand-new, tailored Tom Ford tuxedo he couldn't afford. He was holding court with a circle of wealthy older men, including Douglas Waverly. He's playing them like a fiddle, Richard whispered in disgust. Jordan leaned in close to Douglas, feigning a mask of tragic earnestness and gesturing to his heart. Douglas nodded sympathetically, then pulled his smartphone from his breast pocket, opening a banking app. He's going for the wire transfer, Henry observed, his jaw clenching. He's convincing Douglas to front him the money right now. Not on my watch, I said, my voice cold as ice. I turned away from the balcony and headed for the grand marble staircase that descended directly into the center of the ballroom. My ribs throbbed with every step, a sharp reminder of the violence he had inflicted upon me, but I didn't slow down. I walked with the unyielding purpose of a man coming to reclaim his life. As I reached the midpoint of the staircase, the crowd closest to the stairs began to notice me. The low hum of conversation faltered, heads turned, whispers rippled outward like a stone dropped in a quiet pond. Is that Patrick Sullivan? Someone murmured. I thought he was in a coma. I thought he lost his mind. Another voice carried upward. The string quartet, sensing the sudden shift in the room's energy, faltered and stopped playing entirely. The silence that descended upon the ballroom was absolute, heavy with anticipation and confusion. 200 of the most powerful people in Portland were now staring directly at me. At the bottom of the stairs, I stopped. I stood tall, my posture rigid, my eyes locked onto the center of the room. Jordan had his back to me, still intently focused on Douglas Waverly's phone screen. Douglas, however, had looked up. His eyes widened in shock as he saw me standing there, looking perfectly sane and undeniably furious. Douglas slowly lowered his phone. Patrick. He breathed. Jordan froze. He turned around, his polished smile still plastered on his face. But as his eyes met mine, the mask completely shattered. The champagne flute slipped from his fingers. It seemed to fall in slow motion, tumbling through the air, before hitting the marble floor with a sharp, violent crack. The crystal shattered, sending sparkling shards and expensive alcohol scattering across the polished stone. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. Hello, Jordan, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the ballroom, cutting through the silence like a scalpel. I heard you were looking for investors to cover my medical bills. You can stop begging. I'm right here. Jordan stood frozen amidst the shattered glass, the color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and hollow under the brilliant chandeliers. The 200 sets of eyes, burning into him, seemed to physically weigh him down. For 3 agonizing seconds, no one moved. Then Jordan's survival instinct kicked in. He defaulted to the only strategy he had left: gaslighting. He threw his arms wide and rushed toward me, contorting his face into a mask of overwhelming, tearful relief. Dad, oh my God, Dad. I've been looking everywhere for you. I've been terrified. He reached out to embrace me. I didn't flinch. I simply used single hand, palm out, stopping him dead in his tracks. Do not touch me, I commanded, my voice laced with absolute venom. The crowd collectively inhaled. Jordan stumbled back, his eyes darting frantically around the room, reading the shifting expressions of the elite crowd. Dad, please, he pleaded, his voice cracking, loud enough for the entire ballroom to hear. You need help. The accident, the head trauma. It's making you paranoid. You don't know what you're saying. Please, let me take you to a doctor. I am perfectly lucid, Jordan, I replied smoothly, projecting my voice so that every investor, CEO, and socialite could hear the undeniable clarity in my tone. In fact, I have never seen you more clearly than I do right now. He's sick, Jordan yelled to the crowd, turning to Douglas Waverly in a desperate plea for validation. He doesn't know what he's doing. He wandered out of the ICU. 3 weeks ago, I began, my voice cutting through his hysterical lies. You borrowed my car under the pretense of fixing the brakes. Instead, you took it to a chop shop and paid a mechanic $7,000 to sever the brake line. A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. Women brought hands to their mouths. Men stepped back, their expressions hardening from confusion to horror. Jordan's face went chalk white. That's insane. You're hallucinating. On the night of the crash, I continued, relentless. You stood on the edge of Cornell Road and watched my car plunge into the ravine. You watched me bleed. And while I was unconscious in Legacy Emanuel, you sat in the parking lot and attempted to wire $6.8 million out of my trust fund. Lies, Jordan screamed, spittle flying from his lips, his carefully crafted tuxedo now looking like a clown suit on a desperate man. He's lost his mind. Someone call an ambulance. He needs a psychiatric hold. Patrick Sullivan is of completely sound mind. A deep, authoritative voice boomed from the stairs. Henry Blackwell descended the marble steps, Richard Wade trailing closely behind him. Henry carried an aura of unimpeachable integrity. When Henry Blackwell spoke in Portland, people listened. I have known Patrick for 25 years, Henry announced to the silent room. I have spent the last 3 days reviewing forensic reports, banking subpoenas, and security camera footage. Patrick is not suffering from trauma. He is the victim of a calculated, vicious, and premeditated attempted murder, committed by the man standing in front of you. The ballroom erupted. Whispers turned into shocked exclamations. Jordan backed away, trembling violently. He looked at Douglas Waverly. Douglas, please. You know me. Douglas Waverly looked at Jordan as if he were staring at a venomous snake. Without a word, Douglas slowly put his smartphone back into his jacket pocket, turning his back on my son. One by one, the other investors in the circle did the same. The crowd physically parted, stepping away from Jordan as if his betrayal were a contagious disease. He was entirely alone in the center of the room. You get absolutely nothing, Jordan, I said, delivering the final fatal blow to his ego. You are disinherited. You are evicted from the properties. You are dead to me. Get the hell out of my sight. Jordan's face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. For a split second, I saw the monster Simone had cultivated. His fists clenched, and he lunged forward, a guttural scream tearing from his throat. But before he could cross the distance, 2 men in tuxedos stepped smoothly out of the crowd, intercepting him. They grabbed his arms, twisting them expertly behind his back. Jordan Sullivan, Portland Police, Detective Brooks announced, stepping out from the shadows near the bar, flashing his badge. Jordan thrashed wildly against the plainclothes officers. You set me up, he screamed at me, spit flying from his lips. You set me up, you old bastard. That money is mine. I earned it. You earned a prison cell, Brooks countered coolly. You are under arrest for attempted murder, wire fraud, and extortion. You have the right to remain silent, which I highly suggest you use. The officers marched him toward the exit, his expensive shoes dragging across the marble floor. The crowd parted to let them through, watching in stunned silence, as the golden boy of the Sullivan family was hauled away in handcuffs. As he was pushed through the double doors, he craned his neck, locking eyes with me one last time. There was no remorse, no apology, only the terrified realization that he had lost everything. I stood in the center of the ballroom, the shattered glass crunching under my shoes. Henry placed a heavy, reassuring hand on my shoulder. "It's done, Patrick," Henry said quietly. I nodded, the adrenaline slowly draining from my system, leaving behind a profound, aching exhaustion. "Not quite," I replied. "There is one more piece of trash we need to take out." Later that night, sitting in the harsh, fluorescent glare of an interrogation room, Jordan finally broke. He folded like a cheap suit, stripped of his tailored coat and his arrogant facade. He wept uncontrollably, desperately trying to trade information for leniency. He confessed to everything, the $4 million debt to the underground poker syndicates, the mechanic who cut the brake line, but most importantly, he gave Detective Brooks the name of the woman who had orchestrated the entire gruesome symphony, Simone Parker. She took it, Jordan sobbed, his head in his hands. She texted me after the gala fell apart. She said I was a disappointment, and then she emptied the offshore account we set up together. $2.1 million, everything I had left. She took it all and vanished. Brooks didn't look sympathetic. He slid a file folder across the metal table. Her real name is Sophie Park. She is a professional con artist. She targets entitled wealthy heirs, isolates them, drives them into debt, and convinces them to commit crimes to pay her back. You weren't a mastermind, Jordan. You were a mark. Watching from behind the two-way mirror, I felt a sickening twist of disgust. My son was a murderer, but he was also a fool. TSA flagged her passport, Brooks said, turning to look at me through the glass. She's booked on a first-class flight to Mexico City out of PDX. It leaves in 3 hours. If she gets on that plane, she's beyond our jurisdiction. Then let's go to the airport, I said, a cold fire igniting in my chest. At the airport, the FBI tracked Simone clearing security for a flight to Mexico City. We moved swiftly. Just as the gate agent announced boarding, 4 plainclothes agents surrounded her. She tried to bolt, but was quickly cut off and cuffed. I walked up to her, staring into her cold, empty eyes. "You manipulated my son and tried to kill me," I whispered. She just smirked. "It was strictly business," she replied indifferently, devoid of any remorse. "Get her out of my sight." I told the agents marched her away, her head held high as if she were walking a red carpet. I watched her disappear down the concourse, the reality of her words settling over me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. She was right. There would always be predators, and there would always be willing prey, like my son. 6 months later, the trial began. Jordan took a plea deal, agreeing to testify against Simone in exchange for a reduced sentence. Wearing an oversized orange prison jumpsuit, he looked gaunt and broken on the witness stand. He detailed the entire plot, the gambling debts, the mechanic, the $6.8 million transfer attempt. Simone sat at the defense table, completely unfazed. As Jordan was led away from the stand, he stopped and looked at me, tears streaming down his face. "Dad," he choked out. "I'm sorry, please." I stared at the boy who had coldly calculated my death. I felt crushing sorrow, but no forgiveness. I simply turned my head away. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Simone Parker was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 28 years in federal prison. A week later, Jordan received his sentence, 19 years in the Oregon State Penitentiary. Justice had been served, the law had held them accountable. But as I walked out of the Multnomah County Courthouse for the final time, stepping into the crisp, bright Portland afternoon, I didn't feel victorious. I felt incredibly, deeply tired. Richard was waiting for me at the bottom of the courthouse steps, holding a thick manila folder. The afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows across the concrete. "It's the final paperwork for the Eastmoreland house, Patrick," Richard said, handing me the folder. "The sale is complete. The buyers wired $3.2 million into your newly secured accounts this morning. It's done." I looked down at the folder. That house was where Catherine and I had built our lives. It was where we had brought Jordan home from the hospital, where we had hosted decades of Thanksgiving dinners, where Catherine had lovingly tended her rose garden until the day she died. But now the walls felt poisoned. Every hallway echoed with Jordan's lies. The driveway was a constant, sickening reminder of the day he had borrowed my car to have the break severed. "I can't go back there, Richard," I said, handing the folder back. "I'm starting over." 2 months later, I moved into a smaller, modern house in Lake Oswego, a quiet, affluent suburb just south of Portland. It was a fraction of the size of the Eastmoreland estate, but it was peaceful. It sat right on the edge of the lake, with a large wooden deck and a small patch of earth where I attempted to plant tomatoes, just like Catherine used to do. The house was painted a soft gray. The floors were bare hardwood. There were no ghosts here, no echoes of a family that had violently imploded, just silence, space, and the terrifying freedom of a blank slate. I built a meticulous routine to keep the darkness at bay. Walking 3 miles around the lake every morning, consulting part-time, and attending trauma therapy every Thursday. Dr. Grant didn't demand I forgive my son to achieve closure. She told me I was allowed to be angry and set firm boundaries. I clung to those words for 10 months. This quiet existence worked. I was finally surviving. And then, the letter arrived. It was a standard flimsy white envelope, sitting innocuously in my mailbox on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The return address was stamped in stark black ink, Multnomah County Jail, inmate 47392. Jordan Sullivan. I stood by the mailbox, the freezing rain soaking through my jacket, my hands trembling violently. For 7 days, I carried that letter with me everywhere. I kept it in my coat pocket during my morning walks. I placed it on my desk while I worked. I held it in my hands at night, staring at the slanted, familiar cursive of my son's handwriting. What did he want? The question gnawed at me constantly. Was it an apology? A justification for his actions? Was he blaming Simone for everything? Was he begging for money for the commissary, or asking me to fund an appeal? "You don't have to read it, Doctor," Grant told me when she noticed the crinkled envelope protruding from my jacket pocket during our session. "You owe him absolutely nothing, but if I don't read it, will I always wonder?" I asked, exhausted by the mental toll the unopened letter was taking on me. "Maybe," she replied softly. "Or maybe, reading it will just reopen a wound you've spent the last year trying to close. The choice is yours, Patrick. You hold the power now, not him." On the 7th night, a brutal winter storm rolled over Lake Oswego. The wind howled against the windows, and the rain lashed the glass. I lit a fire in the living room hearth, poured myself a generous glass of aged scotch, and sat on the couch. Picked up the envelope. I slid my thumb under the flap and tore it open. I pulled out a single sheet of lined institutional paper. "Dad, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve to ask, but I need you to know." I stopped reading. "I need you to know." Those 5 words hit me like a physical blow, but not in the way Jordan intended. I stared at the paper, the flames from the hearth dancing in my peripheral vision, and a sudden, crystal-clear realization washed over me. I didn't need to know. I didn't need to know his excuses. I didn't need to know the intricate details of his manipulation by Simone. I didn't need his apologies, and I certainly didn't need his justifications. Reading his words wouldn't undo the crash. It wouldn't mend my broken ribs. It wouldn't bring Catherine back. It would only tether me back to him, pulling me back into the toxic, exhausting orbit of a man who viewed me as nothing more than a bank account to be emptied. For a year, I had asked myself what Catherine would want me to do. Would she want me to forgive him? Would she want me to extend grace to the boy she had birthed and loved so fiercely? But Catherine wasn't here. Jordan had made sure of that by destroying the family she had built. I had to make this choice for myself. I walked over to the fireplace and held the letter over the roaring flames. I hesitated for a fleeting second. This was my final connection to my son. Then I let go. The paper curled and blackened instantly, his apologies turning into gray ash drifting up the chimney. I watched it burn until nothing was left. I walked back to the couch and took a sip of my scotch. The heavy, suffocating weight that had sat on my chest for a year finally lifted. I felt a profound sense of peace. I didn't need to forgive him to heal. I just needed to let go. And I had. The morning after I burned Jordan's letter, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in a year. The winter storm had passed, leaving the air over Lake Oswego crisp and clean. I took my morning walk, but instead of returning home to my quiet routine, I got into my car and drove to Lincoln Memorial Park. I stopped at a florist on the way and bought a massive bouquet of white lilies, Catherine's absolute favorite. It was the very first time I had visited her grave since before the crash. For over a year, I had avoided the cemetery. I hadn't stayed away because I didn't want to see her, but because I carried a deep, crushing shame. I was ashamed that I had failed to see the monster our son was becoming. I was ashamed that I had let him manipulate me, that I had handed him the keys to the car he sabotaged. I felt as though I had failed her legacy. But as I walked along the quiet, tree-lined paths of the cemetery, the morning sun casting dappled shadows on the manicured grass, that shame began to recede, replaced by the peace I had found in the ashes of Jordan's letter. I found her headstone, simple, elegant gray granite, Catherine Sullivan, beloved wife and mother, 1964-2023. I knelt on the damp grass and placed the white lilies at the base of the stone. For a long time, I just sat there, listening to the birds and the gentle rustle of the wind through the old oak trees. "Hi, Catherine," I said softly, my voice catching slightly in my throat. "I'm sorry it took me so long to get here." I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs. And then I started talking. I told her everything. I told her about the crash on Cornell Road, about the severed brake line, about Jordan standing on the edge of the ravine, watching me bleed. I told her about the $8 million transfer attempt, the loan sharks, and the cold, calculating manipulation of Simone Parker. "Our son tried to kill me, Catherine," I said, tears finally spilling over my cheeks. "He sold his soul for a trust fund." The wind blew gently, rustling the petals of the lilies. "I kept asking myself what we did wrong," I continued, wiping my face. "Where did we fail him? But I think you would tell me that we didn't fail. We loved him. We provided for him. We gave him every opportunity, but eventually, people make their own choices, and Jordan chose greed." I paused, tracing the letters of her name carved into the stone. "There was a trial," I told her. "Jordan is serving 19 years. Simone got 28. Justice was served, but it doesn't bring you back, and it doesn't give me my son back." I sat back, crossing my legs on the grass. "He wrote me a letter from prison yesterday. I didn't open it. I threw it in the fire and watched it burn. I hope you understand, Catherine. I can't let him back in. I can't forgive him, not today, maybe not ever. And for the first time, I'm actually okay with that." I looked up at the bright blue sky, the morning sun warming my face. "I sold the Eastmoreland house." I smiled faintly. "Too many ghosts. I bought a smaller place in Lake Oswego. You'd like it. It's peaceful. I even planted a garden. My tomatoes are pathetic compared to yours, but I'm trying." I leaned closer to the headstone, my voice growing stronger, filled with a renewed sense of purpose. "I wanted to tell you what I did with the money," I said. "The trust fund Jordan tried to steal. I didn't keep it. I used $1.5 million to set up an endowment. The Catherine Sullivan Memorial Scholarship. It's for underprivileged kids who want to study architecture and engineering. Kids who need a second chance. Kids who will actually use the money to build something good in this world." I placed my hand flat against the cold granite. "Jordan threw his chance away," I whispered. "But because of you, dozens of other kids are going to get theirs. It's your legacy now, Catherine, not his." I stood up slowly, brushing the grass from my knees. I looked at the grave, at the white lilies, at the name of the woman who had been my partner, my compass, my entire world. "I love you, Catherine," I said. "I always will, and I promise you I'm going to keep living. Not just surviving, but truly living. For you, for me." I turned and walked back down the path toward my car. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I was finally moving forward. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this journey. Patrick Sullivan's story is a harrowing reminder that money has a terrifying ability to expose the absolute darkest parts of human nature. When greed takes root, even the strongest bonds of blood and family can shatter. Jordan wasn't born a monster. He was raised with love and opportunity, but when faced with debt, desperation, and the whispers of a predator, he chose wealth over his father's life. But the true lesson here isn't about the betrayal, it's about the response. Society often pressures victims of abuse to forgive their abusers in order to heal. But Patrick showed us that forgiveness is not a prerequisite for survival. Burning that letter without reading it wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of profound self-preservation. You do not owe your pain, your time, or your forgiveness to anyone who views you as a resource rather than a human being. When someone tries to destroy you, the ultimate revenge is not destruction in return. It is creation. Patrick took the money his son tried to steal and turned it into a scholarship, ensuring that his wife's legacy would build futures rather than end them. Now, I want to hear from you. If you were in Patrick's position, if your own child had meticulously plotted your murder, gone to prison, and then sent you a letter, would you read it? Or would you throw it in the fire just like he did? Drop your answer in the comments below. Be honest. The answer says a lot about your own boundaries and your philosophy on healing. If this story resonated with you, if it gave you strength or a new perspective on dealing with toxic family members, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who might need to hear it right now. And make sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories about betrayal, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Stay safe, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next one.